Okay, then you can move on to you because your situation is slightly different. We spoke about Ancelotti, and you mentioned that it was a way of Perez saving face and probably trying to uh, ease the criticism that he got or the finger pointing that he got from the ESL and Zidane stuff and all of that. But also going to Carlo Ancelotti, was that a way of bringing stability to the club? Because we know from financial point of view, Perez has said that they aren't in the best of financial health. You've had this new stadium come now. Obviously, fans are now allowed, which is great, which will increase income. But for Real Madrid, is it about kind of having someone there who knows the club, who's been at the club before, who knows the players, like you said, the old guard at least, who's had that manager? So has the pandemic or has the fact of the fear of gambling or the fear of failure from that gamble sort of led Perez to maybe Perez would have been a lot more adventurous had the pandemic not been there, or something may have gone for someone a lot more like a Klopp or someone who is a lot more like who's got that aura, that sort of fanciness about him or whatever you want to call it. But he's gone for someone like Carlo, who he knows. With Carlo, I'm safe. I know what I'm getting. I know my players know what they're getting. I know at least I will compete for the top. Might even get the title, depending on what Atletico do and all that. But at least I'll be above Barcelona, thereabouts.
Yeah, I think the pandemic, at least for Real Madrid, it was not I don't think the managerial influence was there directly because of the pandemic. But you never know. It's like a ripple effect, right? The pandemic did have a huge bearing on, for all clubs, it was revenue, right? Like you don't get money from like your season ticket holders and your your regular from the games, and so that was a huge loss. And I remember Perez. So again, my thing is, in a nutshell, for ESL, I thought that the way they announced it and the high-handed way in which they handled it was a complete mess. But the basis of it, if you look at it, it does make sense, because what Seferin says does not make sense now. Because if you look at the way Real Madrid at least have been we have started an Mbappe fund long back. It's not this season. We've not bought players. Hazard was our biggest buy, I think. After that, we've not bought. And even before that, we had a Bale, we had an Hazard, and that was pretty much it. We've not been, the whole Galacticos thing, not happening with Real Madrid for a very long time now. We started the thing, but it's all the other big money clubs now. But now it's no longer, Real is not the biggest money club anymore.
But instead of buying players at a higher transfer price, you guys are paying them that much in wages. So doesn't that?
We are not. That's the thing, right? So I was coming to that. So if you look at this season, we don't have Ramos anymore. We don't have Varane. Okay, we've offloaded players and we've gotten Alaba instead. We've got Camavinga, who's like, what, 18? 17, 18? Like he's super young. So if you compare and contrast this with Barcelona, the whole reason Barca is in a big mess is because of what you just said. Yeah. Because they don't have wage control. Right?
1 million Messi, 850 at Griezmann.
850 for Griezmann, are you joking?
Yeah.
It was. They luckily loaned him out this time, but yeah, they've had to make
They were forced to, right? Because they got like all the
transfer. It's a permanent transfer, right?
It's a permanent loan. It's a loan with
obligation,
definite sell. Basically, they have to buy him.
Barca still paying for his wages, cut of his wages.
Little bit cut price, but whatever. They still
it's a cut price, and there's a clause that he has to play 50%. Only 50% of the games he can play for Atletico or something like that. There's some clause like that, which probably is why he was benched. I'm not sure why he was benched, but with Griezmann, and if you look, I've always said this. So last year also, when I was asked to talk about when the pandemic was happening, and in the middle of the pandemic, I was called and asked to talk about this whole, that time the whole Messi Burofax thing had happened, because every time it was, whenever he needed a contract, it was like, main ja raha hu. So this, and every time the board bent over backwards for him. So why would he not do it?
I guess, yeah.
I would think he's not running a charity. So he like, they're giving me money, I might as well make money. So
Yeah, I so agree with Denuka on this, because this is something that's an inside joke with me and my friends as well. Like, we used to joke that Messi OMTT वगैरह का भी salary लेता है, and they're essentially like, he'll be like, why is he earning? Pay me his salary, and then he like essentially, billing the club as Uber rides and all, because what she said is so true, right? Like, Real Madrid, one of the things I respect is when they even signed Galacticos, the club's always been bigger than anybody else. And the way Barca's been about the whole Messi thing, I absolutely do not blame Messi for, asking for a contract, because you set the precedent.
Yeah.
With Real Madrid, he'd have been out. Like, I'm not a Perez fan, but when you, like, even now, Messi's Barca, I find that statement as a football fan extremely flawed. Right? I do not really agree with that, because you're setting a precedent where you're allowing one person to walk over you. And at one point in time, like a lot of Barca's decline is unfortunately linked with that man, because a lot of signings, a lot of coaches, they were all made in order to appease the player, or in order to suit the player. Now, it's not the player's fault. It's not his brain.
It is. Yeah. It is. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not.
But the precedent that you set is so bad, and people will blame Bartomeu. But I'm sorry, this has been happening since Laporta's first term, right? Like, Pep Guardiola left because he was genuinely fatigued by everything. He was practically trying to manage the situation. Then Rossell came in, and that was another fiasco. So what Denuka said is so right. Like, you can talk about wages and agent fees, but at the end of the day, a club sets some precedents. And I think even with Real Madrid paying those wages, they know exactly, like, they will. It is a ruthless club. It is like Bayern and Real Madrid, and even Chelsea for that matter. In this regard, are extremely ruthless. If a player is not performing, they're not going to give that player more than an X amount of time, and they are most likely going to be able to recoup the money that they spent on the player. Unlike with Barca, like Ousmane Dembele, how can you even talk about a contract extension for that man? I don't think he's fit to play in the ISL. Let's be honest. He's not. He can't stay fit. Like, that club needs, like, that club need, like, the board needs to go to a business school and run.
Exactly.
And somebody needs to take them through a profit and loss like sheet and be like, buddy, you guys have done like Real Madrid did not even have the Bernabeu last year, and they still are in a much better place than Barca, and it's and it's problematic that these guys talk about La Masia, and essentially you've completely destroyed that as well. So I completely agree with what you said.
You just said that players don't perform and the club tends to take him out. Like what many of the clubs do is, like, players don't perform. How much time do you think should be given to a player to?
I think it depends on the coach. Yeah, Laksh. I think it depends if the coach still sees a plan for the player. Like, I think you look at an example of, like, an Eden Hazard, right? Like, he's not hit the ground running at Real Madrid. You could say that his tenure has been a disappointment. But if Carlos is fairly certain that I can plan with the player, or like, for example, with Bayern and Leroy Sané, we've had rumors where we a lot of like the board was in two minds about setting a precedent with paying him such a high salary. But if the coach is planning with him, and if you have faith in the coach, where the coach thinks that I can get the best out of him, don't get someone else, maybe he's settled in with the team. I think there's a lot of factors. I think it depends on how well settled a player is. I also, like, for example, just to, like, and this is just my perspective on, for example, with, say, an Arsenal in this regard, a lot of people that I spoke to saw the Ben White transfer as reckless, especially when you had signed William Saliba 2 years ago. But I don't see it that way, because we don't have the perspective that a coach has on the team. Maybe William Saliba, personality-wise, might not become the player that Arteta wants him to be. And my belief with this is that with personal changes, I think it's a combination of contract and it's a combination of the coach's plans. So with that in mind, I really feel that it doesn't really matter if it's a season or two. I believe that as a club, for example, and here I completely, I take all the criticism with Bayern, because we've made these mistakes with really talented youngsters like Renato Sanchez and Mario Götze, where you could accuse the club of destroying their careers and you'd be right. So I feel that I think the onus lies with the coach and the board to come to a consensus and be honest with the player that, buddy, you're going to be on the bench, and not even in the long term are we planning with you, and your performances have not shown for it. So from that perspective, I was saying that if somebody is not performing, it's the more prudent decision to cut your losses and essentially move on. Something that, to my original point, Barca have absolutely struggled with. When you look at players like Umtiti, Longley, like the list is so long that
the list will go
the
on.
list is the squad essentially. The list is the squad. Barring Frankie de Jong.
Let's kind of get back to the topic of the managers. So, Denuka, you talking about how it's a ripple effect, right? So, so from here, I mean, so like why? Okay, so why do you think the pandemic isn't a sort of direct response? Do you think it's more like the lack of transfers has led to this, and then has led to?
So yeah, when I was talking about the ripple effect and not a direct effect, I was talking more about Real, because the way they did their planning was they took the pandemic into account, right? So Perez spoke about how all the players took a wage cut.
Yeah.
And they have not been so even Odegaard took a wage cut, although he was like, he barely played even. He was you're welcome for that, by the way, Arsenal. But yeah, no, seriously, even Odegaard took a pay cut, and so there was this whole situation, and this time around when with Ramos, it was like, I need an extension, and he had sort of a war of words with Perez over the contract and all of that, like the money and the contract more than anything. Again, it was like, everyone's taken a pay cut. We can't make an exception for you, and this is what we can do because this is how budgeting works. So that's why I was saying for Real, they planned this whole thing. But I do believe the pandemic, of course, has had an impact, because if you look at the stability thing, right, consciously even, you might not want to fire someone at this point because of the whole stability issue. Because here now you need a manager to be more than just a tactical manager. Because, this whole angle of this emotional well-being and physical well-being, all of these things have now come into the picture more so with the pandemic. So, so there was this whole talk, I think, I read somewhere about, how managers will play a more important role now, more than what they did the last time around, because it's a very different game without the fans and because Real Madrid, I think, would have been very happy, to be honest, to be playing in a stadium without fans, because they might not get booed as much. But for like Liverpool or United and all of these other clubs who rely so much on their fans for the the whole motivation factor and to keep going. It's difficult times for the players, even not just physically but also emotionally. And I think if you then make too many changes in with the manager, and you bring in someone who is completely new to the game, I think that emotional well-being aspect also must have featured for some clubs, at least. In Real's case, it came out of nowhere, and it was a completely different situation. But I do believe for clubs, they must have thought of this as well, because that's a huge effect of the pandemic, I think.
No, definitely. And I also feel like, obviously, the resignation of Zidane wasn't Perez's decision. I'm pretty sure Perez would have loved to have Zidane continue. I mean, why would you want to change, like you mentioned, right? Zidane knows the players in and out. He's got a good relationship with most of them, if not all. And so why would you want to change that? But if you are changing it, why not bring in like a father figure like Carlo, who knows some of the squad, who has a good relationship with some of these members? Otherwise, you bring in someone like a Conte, who's left Inter Milan, and you could really destroy things and change things. He'll stir things up, and I mean, it could be for the good, it could be for the better, maybe defensively, but ultimately, maybe things may not have worked out. But yeah, like you mentioned, there are a lot of these things that could come in play.
And I agree. I think Ancelotti is a safe bet. So I definitely agree there, because there were speculations, right? Every day we were thinking about Zidane has not made a decision. There are 3 people waiting. They were like, oh, we have Conte, we have Tuchel. Like every random day, no one, Poch. I'm like, why? Where are these even coming from? There's no basis for this even, but just because like Zidane said, I might not extend or whatever.
Yeah.
And then I think if you look at all of those options, even if they were considering them, Carlo was a safe choice. So definitely that must have been playing on his mind. Plus the whole thing, like I said, he wanted to. I think that is the more deciding factor. Personally, I think. But yeah, as a fan, Carlo is a safe choice.